Hello, everybody. Welcome to another one of our conservation conversations. This time, we're fantastically delighted to be joined by Dr. Laurie Marker, who's the founder and the executive director of the Cheetah Conservation Fund. Welcome, Laurie. It's great to see you here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. And also, we're joined again by Giles Clark, our director of cats and conservation. Also, Giles is an ambassador and a director in the UK for the Cheetah Conservation Fund. So we've got a really strong link with you guys, and we've been working and funding your work over the years. So it's great to be here and talk a little bit about cheetahs and the threats that they're facing, and just sort of get people up to date with what's happening out there in the field with you guys, and ultimately at the end how people can get involved and how they can support. So speaking of, we're both celebrating big birthdays this year. So it's the Big Cat Sanctuary's 20th birthday, and I believe, Laurie, it's the 30th birthday for you guys as well.
It is 30 years of cheetah conservation.
Amazing. So maybe for the guys back home, just a little bit of that history. So, you were the founder. How did that start, and what was the inspiration for starting the Cheetah Conservation Fund?
Well, my background goes in years before that, where I was working in America at a wildlife park, one of the few places in the world that actually had cheetahs. And they fascinated me, and I specialized in them. And next thing you knew, I was in Namibia in the middle 1970s, and I was finding out that farmers were killing cheetahs like flies. And I thought, somebody really needs to do something to try to stop the killing. The cheetah numbers were declining, they didn't breed well in captivity, and we needed to do something. And nobody did anything, so kind of a few years later, I set up the Cheetah Conservation Fund. And then moved here to Namibia, where we set up a full sanctuary research and education center, and this is where we have been based for the last 30 years.
Amazing, yeah, great inspiration. And I think it sort of brings home, you're saying about the cheetah, declining in species, and I guess bringing it right up to the modern day. And WWF's Living Planet report that just come out, saying that we've lost 68% of the biodiversity, and that's just an average, right? So, and then obviously with our extinction program with Mr. Attenborough, painting a really, sort of gloomy picture of what's happening and what's going on out there, and with COVID happening and everything going on in the world. It seems like there's a really dark picture out there. So what's your take on where the cheetah is at the moment, having had sort of 30 years of working and trying to protect them?
Well, we're really concerned. In the world, globally, there's less than 7,500 cheetahs in the world. From a zoo perspective, there's maybe 1,800 that live in captivity that are part of management programs. You're part of the EEP, I think, and there's the SSP in America. And so these management plans play a really key role, but still we might only in captivity have maybe 150 cubs born a year, with about a 30%, 25% infant mortality. In the wild then is where the rest are. So again, less than 7,500 cheetahs in the wild. They are found in about 23 countries and 31 populations. And the majority of those populations are less than 100 individuals. So we're very, very concerned about loss of habitat, fragmentation, aspects around loss of prey. So the numbers are very severe. And where I'm based in Namibia and Botswana, we have 50% of the world's population, but still in that, we still are seeing human-wildlife conflict and farmers killing cheetahs regularly.
Okay, so it doesn't seem like it's not changed, not got better, but it's got worse, and it sounds like the cheetah is threatened. But I mean, is that what's your take on their listing at the moment? Because at the moment, they're still just sort of vulnerable. Do you think that needs to go up to highlight the threat that they're facing?
Yeah, in some of the populations, they are critically endangered, and we'll talk a little bit later about the work that we're also doing up in Somaliland in the Horn of Africa, where there's a huge amount of illegal wildlife trade, pet trade going on into the Middle East. But down in the southern part of Africa, where we do have 50% of the population is still considered vulnerable. But with that, all those animals, most of them, 80% of them are found outside of protected areas, which means there's no government protection. And we've seen in Zimbabwe over a 20-year period of time where the population just plummeted, decimated because of political problems, land use problems. And so we know how critical this can be. And that's why there is a good possibility that they should be uplisted. We have been pushing hard for that. It is not an easy process. There is a lot of science that's gone into it, but these populations are very, very vulnerable and could leave us in too soon of a period of time. That's obviously what Cheetah Conservation Fund does, is to try to keep cheetahs living free and in the wild by developing programs that actually put people into place. So the cheetahs living on their land, but they are being killed for livestock deprivation. And so we deal a lot with the livestock farmers on better livestock management, grazing land management, as well as wildlife management, because the cheetah has to have a prey base. Otherwise, the only thing there is to eat is livestock.
Yeah, okay.
But if you manage livestock,
that shows
yeah.
I was looking at one of your key programs there with the dogs that are guarding the livestock. I mean, Giles, just bringing you in on there, because obviously we've worked with a lot of the guys that are using dogs in very different ways. Saving animals, for example, and Cheetah Conservation Fund obviously having a really good program of farmers sort of buying into the program of having those guard dogs for their livestock. So you've been out there, Giles. Have you seen that in action as well?
Yes, 100%. Like, definitely. You know, it's such a simple, really, but innovative idea. This way of integrating dogs, special breeds of dogs that are very independent, able to live out with herds of livestock and effectively act as the protectors, if you like, which then reduces the take, not just by cheetahs, but of other carnivores. And I think I'm right in saying, Laurie, like, the program is so successful that we now have a 4-year waiting list for farmers for dogs. You know, we just can't produce and train enough dogs quick enough. So it really is, you know, to the point where over 90% of predation on livestock is reduced once we introduce these livestock guarding dogs. So, and just going back to your previous point, sometimes I find when we talk in numbers, it's very easy for people to think, well, 7,500 still, you know, that sounds like quite a lot of cheetahs. What really puts it in stark contrast is when you look at a range map of where cheetahs used to be just 100, 150 years ago to where they are now, you know, and you've got this vast area, most of Africa, most of the Middle East, going right through Asia, through India, and they just don't exist anymore. You know, we've got pockets in Africa, a remnant, maybe genetically, you know, not viable population left in the Middle East in terms of Iran. Like, it's critical, you know, it is critical. And we often hear the term that the cheetah is the most endangered big cat in Africa. Now, you know, we could get into semantics and are they big cats, etc. But, you know, it's certainly one of the most charismatic animals. You know, you only have to ask any toddler, what's the fastest animal in the world? You know, there's no second guessing, and they're so charismatic. You know, I use this analogy all the time. You know, with the tiger in India or other examples. You know, like, it just, if we can't save the cheetah, which is so charismatic. Is that a dog in the background? Which is so.
There's a dog just agreeing with you there,
That's a
Giles.
guardian
Just
dog,
absolutely
right?
agreeing with your point. You're making that point, and he's trying to reinforce it for you.
He seems to agree. He seems to agree. But, you know, if we can't save the cheetah, as charismatic as it is, as iconic as it is, you know, God help us with saving all of those other endangered species. So it really is crunch time. You know, when we talk about biodiversity, you know, cheetah's a perfect example. It's so vital in its natural habitat, and it helps keep the balance that we just can't afford to lose any of these species, but least of all the cheetah.
No. So it's there. I mean, obviously that Living Planet report, the extinction TV show, it's making a very valid point, and it's a wake-up call that we need to take action. And that's, Laurie, exactly what you guys are doing on the ground. And it's great to see, I think, along with a lot of the other guys that we work with, that it's not just about, saving the cheetah. It's about actually working with the populations that are living amongst farming, working alongside and living within the ecosystem that the cheetahs are. So maybe just on that, the guard dog patrol, I mean, how does that work practically on the ground? I mean, are the farmers, buying the dogs, or how do they work with you to sort of to keep those dogs trained and going forward into the future?
Well, we started the program now over 25 years ago, and so we breed the dogs. We have our own goat yard. So instead of just being a conservationist that also says, I love our cheetahs, don't kill them, we also are a model farm. So we raise goats, sheep, cattle, and then work together to show how to live in harmony. So our livestock guarding dogs are born out in our goat yard. And when they're at about 10 weeks of age and they've had all their vaccinations, and we also spay and neuter them, we then place them with the farmers. And we do what we call a pre-approval. So we go out to the farm, we check it out, and then we will place the dogs. And then from there we actually monitor them at 3 months, 6 months, and then annually thereafter. And we keep very close contact with the farmers. So not only do they get the dog, they get us, and we get them, and we get their families and their communities. And that's why the dog program is, gone, so far. We've bred and placed nearly 700 dogs at this point in time. And we use the Anatolian Shepherd, or the Kangal dog, which is a Turkish breed. And they've been used for about 5,000 years, and you could hear their bark. They're famous for the bark. But when the farmers do give them to us, they do sign a contract, they do pay something, a small amount, but by investing in that, it allows them to actually have a lot more investment. Instead of saying, here's something for free, and you go, oh, okay, that's free, what value is it? They have actually invested in this dog themselves. And then also, if the dog isn't properly cared for, we will take it away. And so they have a double investment in it. And they do know how well the dogs work, and the dogs are extremely intelligent. They think on the ground. They're an independent thinker in vast areas, and that's why we selected this breed of dog. Even though there are like 20 different breeds of dogs, this one for us is what has worked best here in Namibia, because we're in vast, very dry areas.
Yeah, it's amazing. So it's great to see that they'd have an ownership of the program, the dog itself, and so again, like you say, investing their time. It sounds like the best way to go forward. But other challenges for the cheetah, I guess, to touch on. You touched on it before, Laurie. So, and I know Giles has been directly out there in Somaliland. So, yes, like the lion, like other cats in Africa and other species, you've got the threat of loss of habitat and other factors, but particularly maybe for the cheetah in the illegal wildlife trade, the pet trade for them, I guess, is one of the biggest threats that they're facing. So Giles, maybe just touching on your experience for the guys at home about being out there and seeing the extent of this trade. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So last year, as part of my role being a trustee with CCF and an ambassador, I find the best way to really speak with conviction of the problems that these animals face is to see it firsthand. So as part of that, I went out to Somaliland, very fortunate to be there at exactly the same time as when Laurie was. And in short, to describe the problem, there is an illegal wildlife trade, as we know of, that deals in all sorts of different species for all sorts of different reasons. And we quite often hear about ones that are involved in traditional Far Eastern medicines, the demand for ivory, demand for rhino horn, tiger bone, all of those. But quite often, most of the time, with the exception of maybe some reptiles and birds, a lot of the wildlife trade deals in products or dead animals. But with cheetahs, it's the demand for them alive, because there's this trophy pet market, if you like, especially active in certain areas of the Middle East, where the very wealthy will acquire exotic pets, cheetahs being one. We know that the cheetahs, if you get them young enough, are probably one of the easier cats to handle and form a relationship with. And so cubs in the Horn of Africa, in the wild, effectively, are being hoovered up, being removed from the wild. Mothers are either killed or chased off. You know, cheetahs are quite easy to intimidate, so chased off from their cubs. And these cubs are then transported across overland to one of the closest crossing points over into the Middle East, which is in Somaliland. And, you know, the scale is unprecedented. You know, when I was there alone, there was over 30 odd cubs. I think back in August, CCF rescued another 16 cubs. You know, we're up to as many cubs, cheetah cubs or young cheetahs that have been rescued in Somaliland as what we've got cats at the big cat sanctuary. Now, if you translate that into thinking that that's only the tip of the iceberg, they're the ones that are being intercepted and confiscated and surviving. You know, for every cub that we've rescued, there's certainly been one or more that hasn't made it. And as I said, they're the ones that are being intercepted. And they're with, you know, less than 7,000, you know, adult cheetahs, probably even less than that in the whole of Africa, but certainly nowhere near those numbers in the Horn of Africa. The populations are not going to sustain, with the other added pressures, that demand. And so what CCF has done is to effectively create, at the moment, we call them safe houses. So these cheetahs, that's my dog now, squeezing his tennis ball. So rescue these cubs and we bring them into safe houses where they're given immediate care, you know, in terms of medically and nutrition, in terms of food and milk. And the idea is that, you know, very shortly, I know Laurie will probably talk about this in more detail, since I've left, you know, there's been another much bigger safe house established. There's a third one that's looking very likely. But beyond that, we're going to need to create a sanctuary type setting where these cheetahs can be housed. And so part of the appeal and why I love CCF so much is because it, in so many ways, it represents my own ethos, and it represents exactly the same ethos that we have at the Big Cat Sanctuary in terms of it's care for the individual, but it's also that bigger picture conservation stuff. And alongside that, it's, as we've just demonstrated, you know, working with the local communities, working with the populations that are at the coalface. But, you know, it's a huge challenge. And that's where, again, the work that CCF is doing, it's rescuing those cubs, it's looking after those cubs, it's working with local authorities, national authorities, it's working with governments in the Middle East, trying to help reduce that demand, because there's not much time. You know, these populations are going to disappear.
Yeah, no, exactly. So Laurie, maybe on the back of that, Giles said, maybe you can just give us a quick update about where you are in Somaliland and sort of what the plans are for next, and how, and you know, what scale is it that you've got to achieve, and what plans have you got to take place?
Yeah. Well, I think, Giles, it was not even a year ago, I think, that you were there, maybe around that. At this point in time, we have 54 cheetahs at the facility. We have finished what we call Safe House 2. We rebuilt Safe House 1, and we're now halfway done with Safe House 3. So these cats are at least in fairly large facilities. But they're kind of like zoo cages, I would say, versus, you know, we've got to get them out of the city. They're behind big walls. And from this, we do have a veterinary clinic as well, so we've had to bring everything in. We've got multiple vets there. It's interesting, too. I want to really call out to our UK friends and family. We've had, our vets are all from the UK, our keepers are from the UK, so it's just great. So if there are people listening in from a wildlife background, we do take staff and volunteers over there to help. Giles was there helping, you know, clean poop and feed babies. So The next thing that we are going to is to be building up what we call a sanctuary. And the Somaliland government has given us a large plot of land that we will be developing. We'll start developing probably about 300 hectares fairly soon. So with that, we will be developing a master plan and naturalistic enclosures for the animals. Some of the other issues that we've dealt with as well is that, you know, when you think of these little cubs that have come in, and I mean, they are tiny, tiny, nutritionally challenged and starving. Again, as Giles said, some of them don't even make it because they are starved to death before we get them. Working with the Somaliland government has been wonderful. The Ministry of Environment and Rural Development, we now have a whole team that when we hear something, we go out immediately. Our vets go along. Oftentimes it's 2 to 3 days before the cats get back to our safe house. So we have to have a vet on call with them at all that period of time as well. And our successes have been great over the last year. But with that, the government has given us this land, and we will be then starting to lay out and develop this sanctuary. It's going to be about an hour outside of Hargeisa, and that will be a challenge in its own right because the area that we're working in is very rural, very, 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 very poor. I think that Somaliland is probably one of the poorest countries in the entire world. Some of the things that we've also been learning is that these cubs are actually picked up by the nomads out there because, as Giles said, the mother might be catching the livestock and they are angry with that, and so they chase the mother away and bring the cubs in. And so we are also then working with them and starting an awareness program that will just be starting in the next, within the next few weeks, where we will be working with these rural communities around trying to let them know that taking wildlife from the wild is against the law, and an awareness around the fact that if you've got livestock problems, we can help. We're working with the Veterinary Association and the Ministry of Agriculture, all to help on a variety of levels, because right now all they heard was, well, I can catch the cub and maybe I can get some money for it, not knowing anything more. And so when you work with that kind of an ignorance, that maybe isn't their fault, but as you can start filling that in through education, we can then start, I think, changing the game for the cheetahs as well.
Yeah,
so we've got two big things that we're dealing with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, again, bringing that back to sort of the same ethos as most of the people that we work with. Education underneath the work is just vital for changing, attitudes and just behaviour of people. And I guess also, Laurie, that you'll be looking at going to the root of the problem with education as well. So the demand for, exotic pets in different states. So that you're working on a program, I think, sort of to go to that side of it and help prevent.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've been actively working with the Middle East for a number of years, and their governments have actually really beefed up their laws, and they are trying to do more and more because they realize it's a problem. Obviously, anything that's illegal just makes it, illegal. Yeah. So, so there has to be peer pressure, and that's why getting into and the people we're dealing with in the Middle East are some of the richest people in the world. So here we are in this paradigm of cheetahs are coming from some of the poorest places in the world, going into some of the richest, and we're trying to make this meet in the middle. But what we want is to keep cheetahs living free and in the wild. And with that, again, enhancing the wildlife prey base. The people in Somaliland have been in they were in a civil war 30 years ago. They've been trying to get their independence for 30 years. They haven't really thought about, this beautiful wildlife that's out there. And much of the antelope species that are on the ground, there are also some of the rarest and most endangered as well. And, we want to grow those populations so that the cheetah has food. And then we need to teach the farmers to protect their livestock so that the cheetah's not eating their livestock but can catch the wildlife. So all of it is it's a circle, and we just need to keep circling the wagon, I guess. So.
Yeah. There is stuff that we can do about all of this. I guess one thing I wanted to touch on, looking back again at the 30 years that you guys have been in action. I mean, research has played a big part over those years, I think, of finding more about the cheetah, and genetics, I think, plays a big part of that. I was interested just to sort of to hear and read about the fact that the cheetah has been to the brink sort of twice before now. We know it's heading down. We know it's part of that 68% of biodiversity that's disappearing, and the numbers speak for themselves. But it's been there twice in ancient history. So what is it about the cheetah's genetic makeup that sort of has led it there and taken it back from the brink? Is there something slightly different to them than there is to other cats or other wildlife out there?
Well, cheetahs actually are very interesting because they do lack genetic diversity. They went through their first population bottleneck around the Pleistocene, which was probably about 10 to 12,000 years ago. And, much of what we've learned from that is what their ranges were, and they actually used to live even over in places like North America, where they're gone. And that was at the Pleistocene. But the numbers became so small in the rest of their range that a few animals survived this Pleistocene extinction, which we don't know a lot about, and from that, the population then came back. So all the cheetahs do have the same genetic makeup. The second bottleneck was really around 5,000 years ago when people found that the cheetah made a good pet, and especially in the Northern Africa and the Middle East, and people were learning how to hunt with them. The Egyptians had them as, pets to their throne, but these animals never bred in captivity, and so that thinned out the populations again from the wild, especially throughout all of the Middle East and all of Asia. And so then they started bringing animals into those areas from Africa. And now the other issues just in the last 100 years has been people-based. Habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict, and those have been the problems facing them now. We always say the cheetah's a survivor. It's survived some of the worst bottlenecks. The genes that have survived are keeping them going. However, you do need to have a diverse gene pool in order to maintain health from disease, reproductive success also. So, I think people don't understand that. When you do lack genetic diversity, like the cheetah, it has like a 70 to 80% abnormal sperm count. And that is based on the lack of genetic diversity. And I'll put that into perspective, that if you had a cow, a bull, that was your breeding bull, and it was like 35% abnormal sperm, he would be sterile and kicked out of your breeding herd. But this is all the male cheetahs in the world having the similar boat. And so that can only get worse. And we've seen that with other small remnant populations, like the Florida panther, for instance, down in Florida in the United States, where they ended up with 90% abnormal sperm and cryptorchid, and then they weren't breeding anymore. So those are the kinds of things that genetics can actually lead to, is poor reproduction and also helping keep them healthy in a pandemic. So disease aspects. And cheetahs are also very susceptible to disease, especially when they're so closely related. So I do keep saying that the cheetah is a survivor, and that's why I'm going to keep working on all levels to try to keep every single animal alive and try to maximize its genetics. Our team here in Namibia, we bank sperm from all wild cheetahs. We've been studying, we've got a genetics lab here, we've got a full veterinary clinic, so we work on all aspects of the cheetah's DNA to its reproduction. And we're trying to use the same model up in Somaliland to try to maximize all of the genetics of those animals as well.
Great. I mean,
Giles
I've seen them now where not only is the cheetah running out of time, but thanks to Zoom, we are a little bit as well. So if we could just maybe focus, Giles, maybe, on a positive note. I mean, it's great that, the work that the CCF have done over the last 30 years. And you're right, Laurie, that cheetah is a survivor. So how can the guys that are watching at home, help you guys to allow that cheetah to survive? What are the sort of practical things that they can do? Giles, maybe you can just kick us off with that.
Oh goodness, how do you answer that in a very limited amount of time? There's lots of things, and we talk about this every time, I think, and it's important, and that's why we should talk about it. It is, biodiversity loss is critical. There's lots of environmental problems, climate change, the changing of the acidity of the ocean, soil, you know, nutrient retention, all sorts of catastrophic problems. But for me, wildlife makes up such an important part of that. It's crucial to the environment. It's going to be crucial to ecosystems and crucial to our, you know, future as a species ourselves on this planet. If people want to directly help, you know, that's get online and support organisations like CCF, because that's what we do, and that's what I, you know, truly believe in. But then we can be going through all of the, you know, recycling, reducing our amount of resources that we use, you know. And one that I suppose seems so obvious now, but people are only just starting to talk about, is the way in which we farm the land and the agricultural practices that we use. And I'm not suggesting for a second, you know, I've worked with carnivores all my life, so I'm not suggesting for a second that we all suddenly become vegetarian and vegans, but we significantly need to reduce the amount of animal products that everybody eats because of how intensive that is on the world's remaining landscapes. So, you know, there's lots of ways in which people can help. And then just my very last point before we jump onto Laurie is that those 54 cheetahs that Laurie have in or CCF have in Somaliland, you know, when I was there with Laurie, 6 of them came in what was effectively a washing basket. That's how they were being transported in the boot of this car. They're tiny, they're so vulnerable, they need such intensive care that it's not realistic or viable to be putting those individuals back out into the wild. You know, CCF will be looking after those cheetahs for the rest of their lives. And on an individual level, that doesn't make it any less important than the ones that are still left in the wild. But for every cheetah that we have to take care of in that setting, that's less resources that we can put back into livestock programs and community engagement, you know. So it's very much a balancing act.
Yeah, no, I get that. So Laurie, maybe the last word to you. I mean, you know, if people are giving and want to support stuff, you know, what's your most urgent need, and where will money and donations go to help you guys out?
Well, we are nonprofit. We are a nonprofit in the UK as well. So go on to our website, which is cheetah.org.uk. And there's a variety of ways. You know, some can be to help sponsor these little orphan cubs that are there. That then obviously helps for their food and care and housing. We are constantly looking for the funding to try to, again, our message is to keep cheetahs living free and in the wild. So enhancing our education staff and our research staff to be working out with the communities so that we can stop the trade, but at the same time we have to continue taking care of the ones that are coming in. So we would love people to join us. Cheetah.org, get involved in our charity there in the UK. Get involved in being a fundraiser. Walk your dog to help save cheetahs. That's one of our fundraising that's going on right now. But we have a wonderful team there in the UK, and we welcome people to get involved with us.
Great. Fantastic. It's great to see us all working together, including our dogs and our cats, and everybody getting involved in this conversation. And hopefully the guys involved at home can get on board and support the amazing work that you guys have been doing for the last 30 years over there. Thanks so much, Laurie, for joining us. Thank you, Giles, for coming again. And thank you to you guys at home for watching. And we'll be letting you know more details about the next conservation conversation coming up very, very soon with the Big Cat Sanctuary. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.